Perhaps you think your life follows a normal course, decisions, chance encounters, small coincidences you don't even notice. But there's an almost imperceptible moment when the invisible begins to move, a delay that prevents you from being in the wrong place, a banal conversation that opens a new door, a simple thought that changes the course of everything. It's not luck, it's synchronicity. When life begins to reorganize itself effortlessly, it's because something within you has silently shifted direction. It's the first movement of the calling, when the invisible center of your existence begins to shift, and everything around you responds. No religion, no name, no doctrine, just an inner impulse, as if time itself had decided to push you to the exact place where you should be. This is where it all begins, when the invisible reorganizes the visible. There comes a point when the mind tires of the noise. External voices, demands, opinions, notifications, inherited fears, begin to lose their power. And between the intervals of this noise, something new insinuates itself, an almost inaudible sound, a kind of guidance that doesn't come from outside. It's the silent compass. It doesn't speak with words. It communicates through sensation. It's that sudden lightness when you think in one direction and the weight when you insist on the opposite. It's a serenity that springs forth amidst the chaos, as if the soul itself were winking at you and saying, "This way." At first, it seems like something small, easy to ignore. You call it coincidence, intuition, chance. But the more you listen to it, the more you realize that this compass knows things that reason cannot yet grasp. It's what makes you change course without understanding why, and only later do you discover that that detour avoided pain. It's what prompts you to call someone for no apparent reason, and the person answers saying, "I needed to hear your voice today." It's what makes you stop, breathe, and feel that time is not lost, only repositioned. When the compass awakens, the world changes texture. Small synchronicities gain clarity. Words that once went unnoticed now seem to contain hidden messages. Encounters cease to be casual. Mistakes cease to be tragedies. Every detail seems to speak to you. But to listen, you need to create space. That's why the first lesson of the calling is the hygiene of noise. Most people live immersed in frequencies that distort this inner guidance. Haste, comparison, anxiety, excessive consumption of information. The noise isn't just auditory, it's emotional. It's the constant worry about pleasing, predicting, controlling, and the more you try to dominate the flow of life, the further you get from that gentle voice, which doesn't shout, only whispers. That's why when the call begins, it almost always comes accompanied by weariness, an exhaustion from fighting against the invisible. It is at this point that the soul decides to take command and silence the rest. Then begins the process of refining your listening skills. You realize that solitude, which once seemed like punishment, now sounds like refuge. That silence, once uncomfortable, is now fertile. It is there that the answers take shape, not as ready-made phrases, but as clarity. And when clarity arrives, it doesn't explain. It simplifies. Things that previously required effort, discussions, and justifications are resolved with a gesture, a decision, a quiet no. The compass doesn't need to prove anything. It simply points. Many call this period a spiritual awakening, but it's more accurate to call it a realignment of attention. What changes isn't the world, it's your perspective. And everything you look at with presence begins to respond. That's why synchronicities increase. Reality is a mirror that only reflects clearly when you stop trembling. When the heart quiets, the universe draws closer. A simple exercise helps to recognize this compass, the convergence diary. Write down every day what repeats itself: names, places, times, symbols, topics of conversation. The soul speaks through repetitions. When you see the same number, the same color, the same phrase in different places, it's not superstition. It's a reminder. It's the compass testing your listening. Sometimes it just wants to say, continue. Other times it warns, not this way. The interpretation doesn't come from the logical mind, but from the feeling that accompanies the signal. If the heart expands, it's a yes. If it contracts, it's a no. But there's a subtle trap in this process. Confusing intuition with anxiety. The compass is calm, never urgent. It doesn't demand, it invites. If a decision seems to carry panic or fear of loss, it's the ego speaking. True intuition has peace even in the face of the unknown. Therefore, a good criterion is to observe the quality of the silence after the choice. If there is serenity, it was the right path. If there is noise, correction will be necessary. Life always offers another chance to realign the pointer. Awakening this compass also changes how you perceive time. Things seem to happen at the right time, and those that don't cease to generate despair. You begin to understand that delays are adjustments, and that nothing is lost, only shifted. This confidence is the basis of a new kind of freedom. Not the freedom to do everything you want, but the freedom not to have to fight against what is. And this freedom is silent, but powerful. It removes the weight of control and restores the pleasure of presence. Over time, you become more selective, not out of arrogance, but because of your vibration. Certain conversations, places, and people lose their meaning, not because they are bad, but because they no longer resonate with who you are becoming. The compass changes course, and some companions simply no longer fit on it. And that's okay. The awakened soul understands that love is not about insisting, it's about allowing each person to walk according to their own inner direction. In this new state, even silence acquires a language. There are days when you wake up with a sudden intuition. To call someone, visit a place, write something. When you obey, you realize the gesture had a purpose, and when you ignore it, something hangs in the air, like an undelivered message. That's how you gradually learn to trust. It's not about mysticism, but about tuning in. The invisible has always spoken. You just had your radio out of frequency. And then there are the tests, situations that seem confusing precisely to hone your listening skills. The compass is not a toy, it is a sacred instrument. It will teach you through apparent mistakes so that your confidence grows. Sometimes it leads you to a dead end, not to punish you, but to show you that you already know how to return without getting lost. Every detour is part of the route. Every silence is a word in formation. The second sign of this cycle is the fleeting peace, that feeling of right that lasts only a few seconds but is unmistakable. It appears after a coherent decision, even if the result is not yet visible. This brief serenity is the true endorsement of the invisible. It is proof that the compass is alive. The more you recognize it, the more stable it becomes, until one day the silence transforms into voice, and the voice becomes the path. The silent compass is the first gift of the calling. It is the beginning of the cooperation between your will and the will of the universe. When it awakens, you are no longer adrift, even without a map, even without certainty, because now, within you, there is a north that does not change with the wind. And when you begin to walk guided by this north, you discover the truth that many spend their entire lives searching for. Faith is not believing in what does not yet exist. It is recognizing what is already happening. When the silent compass stabilizes within you, something inevitable begins to happen. The parts of your life that were misaligned begin to collide. Fragile relationships break down. Jobs that only serve to maintain appearances begin to suffocate. Words spoken out of habit leave a bitter taste. It's as if the universe, now calibrated to the new frequency of your soul, begins to cleanse everything that doesn't match your true sound. This is the second cycle of the calling, the gravity of coherence. Consistency is not perfection. It is harmony between what you know, what you feel, and what you do. And the spiritual calling always demands this harmony, not to punish you, but to make you whole. Human beings can endure living in contradiction for a long time until they awaken. And when they awaken, lies, even small ones, social ones, polite ones, become unbearable. The soul begins to react to each inconsistent gesture as the body reacts to a fever, trying to cure the imbalance. This reaction is what we call a crisis of consistency. At first, it's painful. You feel torn between two worlds, the old, comfortable one and the new one, which demands courage. Perhaps you realize you can no longer laugh at the same jokes, frequent the same places, or maintain conversations that once distracted you. Everything seems too narrow. Your soul has expanded, but life still wears small clothes, and it is in this space of discomfort that the purest courage is born. Not the courage to fight against the world, but the courage to be true to who you have become. The universe is mathematical in its precision. When inner truth awakens, it begins to attract experiences compatible with it and repel those that are not. That's why in this cycle, Certain people naturally drift away without drama, and others draw closer, as if they had always been waiting for you. The calling adjusts the magnetic field of your existence, and everything that vibrates differently reorganizes itself. You don't lose, you just change orbit. But this gravity also demands small deaths. The need to please dies. The addiction to explaining everything dies. The old image of who you were dies. In its place, a serene simplicity is born. You begin to speak less and feel more. Words lose importance when your behavior speaks for you. And curiously, people notice. They can't explain what has changed, but they perceive that there is something different in your gaze. It is coherence, radiating effortlessly. Consistency, when alive, creates a powerful force of attraction. It's what makes the improbable happen, doors opening, opportunities arising, the right people appearing. The universe recognizes those who are aligned and responds with fluidity. What once required struggle now flows. But the opposite is also true. When you betray what you know to be right, the universe closes the circuit. Things stall, plans get stuck, and life seems out of tune. It's not punishment, it's recalibration. Consistency is the spiritual gravity that keeps destiny in a stable orbit. Being consistent, however, doesn't mean becoming inflexible. A rigid ego imitates consistency, but does so out of pride. True consistency is humble. It knows when it's time to correct course. It's not ashamed to say, "I was wrong," because it understands that mistakes are also part of learning. What it doesn't allow is persisting in lies. Therefore, in this cycle, one of the hardest lessons is learning to ask for forgiveness, not with guilt, but with awareness. Asking for forgiveness is aligning your heart with the truth, recognizing that you have learned, and moving forward lightly. Another aspect of this cycle is what I call the 1-degree rule. Many people believe they need to change their entire lives at once, but the calling doesn't demand that. It only asks for adjustments of 1 degree, day after day. A small, constant realignment is more powerful than any emotional revolution. 1 degree today and tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, in a month, the horizon is different. That's how coherence is built. Not in heroic gestures, but in daily micro-decisions that sustain the right direction. Consistency also brings a new kind of courage, a silent courage. It doesn't need an audience. It's the strength to remain kind when it would be easier to retaliate, to maintain integrity even when no one is watching, to remain honest when lying seems more profitable. It's the courage to be the same inside and out, in public and in private. This serene courage is the true power that the calling awakens. It doesn't shout, but it transforms everything it touches. At this point, a curious phenomenon occurs. The more consistent you become, the clearer the inconsistencies of others become. You begin to see human contradictions with painful clarity, and the temptation is to judge, to want to wake up the other person, to point out their mistakes. But the calling teaches an essential lesson. Consistency is not a weapon, it is a light. It illuminates, but it doesn't burn. Your example speaks louder than any speech. The true master doesn't convince, he inspires through his vibration. Consistency also has its social cost. You might lose friendships, jobs, relationships, but everything that dissolves at this stage wasn't a loss, it was a burden. Truth doesn't destroy anything that is true, it only exposes what couldn't stand up. So when life seems to be crumbling, look again. Perhaps it's just being rebuilt on real foundations. Over time, coherence generates a divine side effect, serenity. You stop reacting to every provocation, stop justifying yourself, stop arguing. The battles diminish because you no longer need to win to feel whole. Inner coherence becomes your home. And when the soul is at home, the outside world loses its power to hurt. This cycle also teaches you to trust longer processes. You learn that not every seed sprouts at the same rate, and that staying true to what you believe is more important than seeing immediate results. Consistency isn't about speed, it's about constancy. It's the opposite of spiritual haste. It's the patient cultivation of a character aligned with truth. Ultimately, the gravity of coherence is what sustains the rest of the journey. It is the invisible structure that prevents your faith from becoming fantasy. Without coherence, all spirituality is just beautiful theory. With coherence, even silence becomes prayer. Every daily gesture becomes an altar. Every word spoken with truth becomes a blessing. every honest choice reconfigures the world around you. When you live in coherence, reality begins to treat you differently. It recognizes you, coincidences become confirmations, and even difficulties gain purpose. It's as if the universe were saying, now that you're walking in a straight line, I can show you paths that were hidden. And suddenly, everything that once seemed distant begins to draw closer, not through effort, but through resonance. This is the power of spiritual gravity. It attracts what vibrates at the same frequency as truth. And once you enter this field, there is no turning back. Lies become burdensome, deviation painful. Consistency demands constant vigilance, but rewards with lightness. Because the price of living outside of it is always greater, emptiness, confusion, loss of peace. At the end of this cycle, you understand that the calling isn't about being special. It's about being true. That destiny isn't a prize, it's a natural consequence of integrity, and that the world doesn't change when you shout the loudest, but when your silence vibrates at the same note as what is eternal. Coherence is the gravity that keeps the spirit orbiting the divine. It sustains it when everything else fails. And it prepares the ground for the next cycle, the one in which love ceases to be emotion and becomes movement. After traversing the territory of coherence, the calling begins to expand outward from you. The energy that previously served only to sustain your own truth now overflows. The impulse to help, to serve, to be useful arises, and for the first time this desire does not stem from obligation or the need for recognition. It comes from a deeper place, as if the universe itself wanted to act through your hands. It is at this point that the third cycle begins, hidden fecundity, the moment when the invisible begins to generate visible fruits through your life. Spiritual fruitfulness is different from ordinary productivity. It is not measured in numbers, applause, or followers. Its results are often invisible, and yet powerful. It is the simple piece of advice that changes someone's course, the silent gesture that consoles an old pain, the hug that replaces 1,000 words. The fruitful soul does not need to be seen, because it has already understood that what is real does not need an audience. It serves because it can no longer not serve. At this stage, you begin to notice something curious. The more you give, the more you receive. But what returns isn't material, it's peace. The feeling of being exactly where you should be, doing exactly what you should be doing, even if the world doesn't understand. True service is a form of prayer in motion. It happens when you become a channel and let the energy flow. And the most surprising thing is that the more you give, the fuller you become. Love, when offered without calculation, multiplies like the bread and fish of the ancient parable. It never runs out. However, to reach this level of fulfillment, there is a process of purification. Hidden fecundity always passes through the soil of pain. Suffering, once seen as punishment, now reveals itself as the raw material of light. Life begins to teach you that every wound is a seed, and that what hurts today may blossom tomorrow in the form of compassion. This is why the most luminous people you know have almost always passed through deep abysses. Pain, when accepted and transformed, creates spiritual roots that sustain silent miracles. This transformation begins when you change the question. Instead of, "Why did this happen to me?" the question becomes, "What is this happening to me for?" The first question paralyzes, the second awakens. When you seek the what for, you open space for meaning. And where there is meaning, there is light. Wounds cease to be an end and become portals. It is through them that the soul breathes the invisible. Each loss, each disappointment, each failure has a hidden code that teaches something about your mission. And fruitfulness is born precisely there, at the point where you decide not to waste the pain. A simple example. Someone is betrayed, humiliated, discarded. For weeks, they feel only the weight of the injustice. But one day, amidst tears, something changes. Instead of asking, "Why did they do this to me?" they ask, "What can I do about this?" And that's how one day this person begins to help others overcome the same thing. They write, advise, listen. What was once a wound is now a source of strength. This is the hidden fecundity, transforming what hurt them into medicine for the world. This cycle also teaches that giving is not losing. The world often confuses generosity with weakness, but the calling reveals the opposite. Serving is an act of power. When you offer without demanding, you create a space where the divine can act. And when the divine acts, the impossible happens. Small actions take on unexpected proportions. The gesture that seemed small reverberates in invisible waves that touch lives you will never know. It is the mystery of the seed. It disappears beneath the earth, but its fruit one day nourishes those who don't even know it existed. Fertility also manifests itself in the synchronicities that follow service. You help someone, and, days later, you receive exactly what you needed from an unexpected source. Life responds to generosity with mathematical precision. It's as if it were saying, "I saw what you did, and now I will do the same for you." But the reward is not the focus. When you serve out of love, the return ceases to matter. The mature soul serves because it has already understood that it is in giving that it feels alive. However, there is a subtle test in this cycle, that of spiritual exhaustion. Many confuse service with sacrifice. They try to save the world while forgetting themselves. But true service never drains. It nourishes. What tires us is not serving. It is serving without coherence. When the ego tries to take over the altar, the body feels it. That is why fruitfulness requires discernment. Giving too much is as unbalanced as not giving at all. The fruitful soul learns to heed the moment to withdraw so that the river does not dry up. Rest is also service, because it allows one to continue serving with purity. One of the practices in this cycle is what we can call a delivery map. It's simple. Observe where your natural gift meets a real need. The calling won't take you to places where you have nothing to offer. It will guide you precisely to the point where what you carry within can heal what the other person needs. The delivery map changes over time because the soul grows. Sometimes what was service yesterday is already completed learning today, and that's okay. The calling is dynamic. It moves with the flow of life. As the days go by, you realize that everything you've experienced, joys, losses, failures, was preparing the ground for this kind of contribution. The suffering wasn't in vain. It was fertilizer, and the harvest is abundant even if discreet. It's not made of fame or trophies, but of illuminated faces, words spoken at the right time, unexpected reconciliations. These are fruits that time scatters, but the soul recognizes. And when you see these fruits, you understand the divine is working in you and also through you. At this point, life begins to take on a new rhythm. Things that once seemed chaotic now appear orchestrated. Chance reveals itself as providence. You begin to see that everything that has passed was a rehearsal for the present and that nothing has been lost. Each painful experience was a secret stepping stone on the path of your mission. This is what we call hidden fecundity, the power to transform pain into meaning, service into peace, and surrender into eternity. And the most beautiful thing is that, even without realizing it, you begin to inspire others. Your life becomes a silent testament to hope, without speeches, without fanaticism, just presence. People feel something around you, a serenity that requires no explanation, and at that moment, you understand that serving is not about doing a lot, it's about being a channel, letting good flow through you and reach those who need it. The fertile soul becomes the instrument through which the invisible acts upon the visible. This is where the calling ceases to be merely personal and becomes collective, because when a soul awakens, it illuminates those around it. Every act of love, however small it may seem, changes the fabric of the world. Hidden fertility is living proof of this. The divine continues to create through us even on days when we don't realize it, and the harvest, though it comes silently, is certain. When you understand this truth, you will realize that you don't need to do great things. Just allow love to use you in the small things, and you will see that the greatest miracles happen in the folds of everyday life. A kind look, attentive listening, a comforting presence. It is there in simplicity that the divine operates with the greatest force, and it is there that the next cycle begins, the cycle of the broad horizon, where time ceases to be an enemy and becomes an ally. There comes a moment on the spiritual path when time ceases to seem like an enemy. The hours no longer run against you, delays don't hurt, waiting doesn't weigh you down. Everything begins to flow like a river that, even amidst the rocks, finds its course. This is where the fourth cycle begins, the broad horizon, the moment when you start to see life from the perspective of the eternal and no longer from the immediate. After the silent compass, the coherence and the fecundity, something within you has matured. The soul, once anxious to understand, now only desires to live in harmony. This transition is subtle, yet profound. Haste gives way to trust, and the need to prove gives way to presence. Time ceases to be a line and becomes space, a space in which each second contains eternity. The first lesson of this cycle is conscious patience. Not resigned patience which waits with arms crossed, but active patience which knows that everything that is true takes time to blossom. It's like a seed planted in silence. You don't see the growth, but you feel that something is alive beneath the earth. The mature soul learns to respect this rhythm. It no longer plucks the flowers before spring. Life then begins to reveal a new kind of synchronicity. Time aligns with purpose. Situations that seemed blocked open up effortlessly. Paths that made no sense intersect perfectly. People return, opportunities reappear, and you realize that the universe has always been organizing everything. You were just trying to rush the process. When the heart slows down, time cooperates. But the wide horizon also brings a challenge: expansive loneliness. It's not the absence of people, but of distractions. You begin to realize that most people are busy, not because they have a lot to do, but because they are afraid to stop. And when you stop, the silence envelops you in a new way. It's no longer empty, it's vastness. And in that vastness, you begin to feel something different, a communion with everything that exists. This is the second lesson in the cycle: practical unity. It's no longer enough to talk about love, it's necessary to live it in small things. The calling reaches its most mature point when love ceases to be a feeling and becomes conduct. When you see the other and recognize in them the same spark that dwells within you, life changes its tone. Compassion ceases to be an extraordinary act and becomes the natural way of existing. This is where the concept of serving transforms. Serving is no longer about helping others, it's about caring for oneself through others, because the boundary between I and we begins to disappear. The good you do returns instantly in the form of balance. The harm you cause, even if small, returns as immediate discomfort. Practical unity is the point where spiritual law ceases to be belief and becomes direct experience. In this state, a new form of wisdom emerges: responsible lightness. You understand that everything you do has consequences, not out of fear but out of awareness, and so you act with more attention, more calm, more tenderness. You no longer seek to be right, but to be at peace. And curiously, it is precisely this peace that makes you make the best decisions, because the spirit, when tranquil, sees clearly. One of the practices that consolidates this cycle is what we call the daily triad. 3 simple gestures that keep the vibrational field in harmony. The first is silence, a few minutes of pause in which the mind rests and the soul breathes. The second is service, an act of kindness, however small, done with presence. The third is coherent choice, a decision, even a small one, that reflects what you truly believe. These 3 gestures, repeated daily, create a magnetic field of alignment. They anchor you in the present moment and remind you that the divine manifests in humble repetitions, not in grand revelations. At this point in the journey, time begins to dissolve more profoundly. The past loses its power to imprison, the future loses its power to frighten. What remains is the present, but not the hurried now of networks and productivity. Rather, the eternal present, the point where everything meets. To live in this present is to realize that nothing is lost. Every mistake served a purpose, every pain taught, every encounter shaped who you are today. With a broadened horizon, you also learn to recognize the geometry of the invisible, the way people, situations, and even obstacles fit together with mysterious perfection. You begin to appreciate before you understand, to trust before you see. Life ceases to be an enigma and becomes a dialogue. And the universe, which once seemed indifferent, now sounds like a song you have finally learned to listen to. What was faith becomes evidence. What was theory becomes practice. You begin to realize that spirituality is not a refuge distant from reality, but the art of living it consciously. It's waking up and feeling that everything that happens, the spilled coffee, the traffic delay, the unexpected message, is part of the same thread. And in that thread, there are no wrong knots. There is weaving. This new perspective changes your relationship with people. Judgment gives way to understanding. You realize that everyone is at a different stage in their lives and that there are no better or worse people, just souls at different times of maturation. Patience with others arises naturally because you realize that everyone, including yourself, is learning the same lesson at varying paces. Practical unity also invites you to humility, because the more you see the divine in everything, the less you want to place yourself above others. Spiritual arrogance dies, and in its place is born silent respect. You no longer want to prove that you know, you only want to live what you have learned. And this paradoxically makes you a beacon for others, not because you shine brighter, but because you don't try to outshine anyone. At this stage, prayer changes form. It ceases to be a request and becomes gratitude. You no longer speak to God only to ask for guidance, but to thank Him for every turn in the road. The why becomes thank you. The when becomes I trust. The soul finally understands that God's timing is not measured in clocks, but in consciousness. And then an indescribable feeling arises, eternity breathing within the instant. You watch the sunset and understand that it has always been there. You touch someone and feel that this touch is part of something greater that transcends bodies and eras. You walk the same streets as always, but realize that the whole world has changed. Or perhaps it was only your gaze that at last aligned with that of the Creator. It is at this point that unity becomes concrete action. You begin to care for the earth, not out of activism, but out of love. You start treating people with more kindness, not out of morality, but out of recognition. You speak less, listen more. You act less on impulse and more out of clarity. And each choice becomes a prayer, each gesture a testimony. This is the culmination of the journey, when the spiritual and the everyday merge, when the invisible is no longer sought, because it manifests itself in the simple things. It's when you realize that heaven was never distant. It was always hidden in the way you experience earth. And then a new cycle begins. You feel that something within you has been pacified but not ended, because the calling doesn't end. It only deepens. The horizon expands each time you reach it, and the more you see, the more you understand that the mystery is not to be solved, it is to be lived. When the soul reaches this point, life ceases to be a race and becomes a journey. Time ceases to be accounting and becomes communion, and the other ceases to be a stranger and becomes an extension of the same breath. This is true unity, not thinking that everything is one, but feeling it in practice every day. And so, with serenity, you discover the secret that so many traditions have tried to explain with words. Fulfillment lies not in reaching the divine, but in allowing Him to express Himself through you. And when that awareness envelops you, the silence returns. But now it's different. It's not the absence of sound, it's total presence. And in that silence you understand that you've arrived home. Everything that began with a whisper ends in silence. The journey of the calling was not about learning something new, but about remembering what has always been there. The presence that observes, the voice that guides, the love that sustains. You walked through the 5 cycles. You listened to the compass, purified yourself in coherence, served in silence, matured in time, and rediscovered unity. Now all that remains is to live mindfully, tenderly, and gratefully. Every gesture can be sacred, every breath can be a prayer. The divine is not distant. It pulsates in the moment, in the gaze you offer, in the peace you cultivate, in the hope you spread. Close your eyes for a second and feel. Nothing is missing. You have arrived where you always were. The invisible has reorganized your life, and now the visible reflects what is eternal within you.